Hi everyone, I'm Leanne and today I'm going to be reviewing the books that I read in September. So I read quite a lot of books in this month. I read 16 books, so I think this is my biggest reading month in terms of quantity that I've had all year. And the reason for this is because I sort of did a bit of a nod to shorty September. So quite a few of the books that I read are shorter ones than I would normally pick up. And for some reason, at the start of September, I convinced myself that I was going to try and read a book for every day in the month. So I wasn't imagining that I would start and finish a book all in one day, but I imagined that there might be opportunities where I would finish off a couple of books in the same day, mixing shorter reads with longer ones. And honestly, I was completely delulu to think that I was going to be able to do this, but because I was trying to make a conscious effort to do it, I did end up still reading a lot more than I think I would have ordinarily. As I said, there are 16 books to talk about, so I am going to get straight into it now. Starting with Human Rights by Juno Dawson. So this is the third book, fourth if you count the prequel novella of the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series by Juno Dawson. I have read a lot of this author's books. I am a big fan. I don't read tons of fantasy, but this book hits, and this whole series hits a real sweet spot for me in terms of the fantasy that I do like to read, because I find that it needs to be grounded in some sense of reality. So if the book is solely set in kind of a magical, fantastical world, I really struggle with that. But if there is a real sense of it being grounded in the real world, I get on with fantasy much better, and that is exactly what this series does for me. It's quite difficult to talk about the third novel in the series because there are so many big twists and turns throughout the previous books. But essentially it is about a group of witches who are in Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which is this secret government organization in the UK, and witches are part of the protection of the country. What I really love about how this series is grounded in reality is that so many of these witches, and also the cast of characters more broadly, are ordinary people that you would meet. It does feel very genuinely there could be these people amongst us that we just don't really know about them. The series also really thoughtfully takes a look at things like misogyny and transphobia, things that are prevalent and in fact sadly growing in our society. And whilst it transposes those topics into something that is from the fantasy realm, the engagement with those topics is so relevant to our real world. I thought this was great. I actually listened to the audiobook that I got via my library of this rather than reading it physically, because it is narrated by Nicola Coughlan and she does such a phenomenal job. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I also read Bittersweet by Hattie Williams. In this book, we are following Charlie, who is a 23-year-old publicity assistant working in the publishing industry. And the story follows her getting to grips with that part of the world, her relationships with her friends, colleagues, family, but also specifically an affair that she enters into with a much older writer. So he is in, I think, his 50s. He's very powerful, very influential, a literary writer. He's very well known. And Charlie really idolizes this man, and we see how emotionally complex this becomes for her, the toll it begins to take on her, the impact that it has on her professional life as they keep this affair secret. Sometimes I find books that engage with the publishing industry a little bit close to home in a way that I find a little bit irritating, but that was definitely not the case with this one. I think possibly because it's set in quite a literary area of publishing, that step of removal was something that was a real benefit to my reading experience of this. Generally, relationships that have significant power imbalances is something that I'm really interested in reading about, and I think the author did a really fantastic job of painting all of the characters in this book with nuance. I think it would be very easy to paint this much older author as just a thoroughly unpleasant, bad person, but there is way more nuance to the depiction than that. I thought this was a really strong debut. If any of those kind of themes or topics appeal to you, I would definitely encourage you to read this one. I also read Ordinary Love by Marie Rutkowski. So this is about the relationship between two women who were together when they were younger, but their lives have since gone in very different directions. So one of these women is a highly successful athlete athlete with this incredible career. The other woman has found herself in a life that is much more kind of domestic. She has the husband, the kids, and in fact, it's not a very happy marriage at all. And the way she is treated within this marriage is not okay. We follow these women reuniting and we pick up their relationship from there, 20 years after they were initially together. I found that premise really interesting, this idea of kind of a second chance love, reconnecting with like your queerness after a long-term relationship that was kind of outwardly shown as being heterosexual. But for some reason that I can't quite put my finger on, I ultimately found this novel a little bit forgettable. I don't think there was really anything about the two main female leads that I found kind of compelling enough or like kind of made me want to root for them. I was really rooting for one of them to be out of their horrible relationship, but I don't know if I necessarily felt a drive to root for her to be in this other relationship. I really did feel like this woman kind of just needed some time on her own, and that's why I felt like I couldn't root for them. I've not heard too many people talking about this one, so if you've read it, I would love to hear your thoughts. I also read Last Ones Left Alive by Sarah Davis Goff. So this is essentially a zombie novel that is set in like rural Ireland. So it's set on an island off the west coast of Ireland. What I really enjoyed about this book was how it brought in elements of Irish culture like the Banshee. And my main takeaway from this book was that I actually wanted to read more books that delved into that a bit. If you know of any books that like are specifically about banshees, I would love to hear about them. But to be honest, that was my main takeaway from this book. And I do think it is one of those instances of like, it's not you, it's me. I think just a more kind of literary dystopia / zombie novel is it's just not for me. I also read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. And I think this might be my most pleasant reading surprise of the year. So I have watched Hank Green online. I've been following the Vlogbrothers for I guess probably over a decade, and when I was younger I definitely read a lot of John Green books, but I hadn't yet picked up Hank Green's fiction debut. I'd heard lots of really good things about it, but I just wasn't sure if it was for me. This is about a 23-year-old in the States called April who stumbles across this like giant sculpture. It's 10 foot tall, it is wearing like this full suit of samurai armor, and nobody knows where this has come from. And in fact, they've been popping up around the world and nobody knows where they have come from. April has just ended up being the first person to document this along with one of her friends. So in the initial flurry of media, both mainstream and social attention, she ends up at the forefront of the commentary around it, and this kind of snowballs to her becoming really, really involved with the continued conversation around what the Carls are, what their intentions are, and it becomes increasingly complex and involved in kind of like geopolitical considerations. It really does just continue to snowball, and she finds herself in this position of being such a key part of, I suppose, activism when she didn't necessarily plan to. And I suppose through that the novel becomes this exploration of what we attach meaning to, how things on social media can get out of hand so incredibly quickly, how society is really quick to judge things that they don't understand. There was just so much complexity to this novel, so many really thought-provoking points of discussion, and the ending of this book has left me dying to pick up the second one. If you have read this one, I would love to talk about it because it just really took me by surprise with how much I enjoyed it. I also read Greatest of All Time by Alex Allison. So this is a proof copy. It came out back in January, and this was another novel that I really, really got so much out of and enjoyed. So this is about the relationship between two Premier League footballers. So one of them is this homegrown talent, and the other player is someone who is joining the team on a loan deal, so not a permanent deal. And we see how their relationship begins really quite tense because they are competing for the same position in the squad, but there is also this real kind of chemistry and attraction that they have to one another, and it explores what that is like in this kind of sporting environment. I certainly wouldn't say that this is a romance by any means. There are a lot of problems within that relationship. The power dynamics are very, very messy. The pressure that is put on both of them in this really hyper-masculine environment where being openly queer is not really accepted. I found so much of that really fascinating to read about, but also I found all of the football stuff really fascinating as someone who is a big football fan. all of the stuff around, you know, how the football club was functioning and the role of agents. That was all really, really interesting to me. And I thought the author did an absolutely amazing job of not specifically setting it with like any one football team, because that would have been like basically impossible for him to do. But it still felt like so authentic, and I felt like I knew exactly the type of like club that they were playing for, and like I felt like I really knew who these characters were. It delved into so many topics about kind of society more broadly, topics of sexuality of course, but also the role that race plays within football and society more broadly, all of the social stuff that comes with the personal lives of being such a high profile professional footballer. This is definitely one of my favorite books of the year. I read another fiction book about football that I did not love as much, and that is J.L. Carr's How Steeple Sinterby Wanderers Won the FA Cup. So this is a very brief novel that follows a very obscure, like low level football team who do not have basically any resource. Their pitch is always flooded, like they are very kind of low leagues. It follows their mammoth journey to eventually go on and win the FA Cup, which is one of the biggest domestic competitions in the UK. And people always say the beauty of that competition is because it is inclusive of so many different tiers of the football leagues. You can have these incredible success stories where you see smaller, more local clubs competing with absolute giants of the game. But the writing style for this was just not for me. I'm not sure if I felt like it was just kind of its time, or it had a kind of humor to it that just didn't connect with me. I'm sure there are so many people that would absolutely love this book, but it just wasn't one for me. I also read The Inseparables by Simone de Beauvoir. So this is fiction, but it's really heavily inspired by Simone de Beauvoir's own life. And it chronicles her childhood relationship with a friend of hers who from the moment she meets her at primary school, she is fascinated by her. And it follows the more romantic feelings that she had for her friend that weren't necessarily reciprocated. But throughout the book, we have this beautiful chronicle of these girls growing up and getting to grips with the world and beginning to understand society and politics and art. And essentially we follow them as they become women, and in fact the societal pressure piles on their shoulders as they get older. In this particular edition, there is a lot of commentary around how this maps onto Simone de Beauvoir's actual life, which I found really fascinating. If you are someone who is interested in this great feminist thinker, you will naturally get a lot from this book. I really appreciated finding out more about her life beyond her work, and yes, would definitely recommend. The classic that I read in September was The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton, and I really enjoyed this. It is slightly ridiculous. It's a story of anarchists and undercover policemen. In a very strange and almost humorous way, this novel explores lots of themes of paranoia, as they know someone has like infiltrated the ranks and are all kind of pointing fingers at each other and not knowing what's really going on. And as we find out more and more about who these people are and their various motivations, it becomes stranger and sillier. It is sort of a spy book, but it also has this like political humor to it, and I found this very entertaining. I also read Why God is a Woman by Nin Andrews. This is poetry. It's told in verse, but it does have a narrative that runs throughout it that takes a look at this imagined feminine utopia where the power imbalances of our own world is completely flipped on their heads with this kind of strange and fabulous nature to it. It's a narrative that really leans into its own absurdity, and some of the ways it flips power dynamics on its head is very entertaining. Overall, I had a very entertaining and also thought-provoking reading experience with this one. I also read a non-fiction book, so I read Love in Exile by Sean Fay, and essentially this is a collection of essays that explore the topic of love in many forms. So there is romantic and sexual, there are friendships, there is the relationship that you have with yourself. The author is sharing their experiences of all of those things and makes so many thoughtful points that really resonated with me. I also really appreciated Sean sharing her experiences of being a trans woman and how that particularly impacts how she navigates her relationships with love in all of its different forms. The book is very wise, it is beautifully honest. I am definitely really interested in reading lots about this kind of topic. I think love is one of the most kind of fascinating things that we as people do. And I was really grateful for this author sharing her experiences of that with us. I thought it was brilliant. It gave me lots to think about and I would really recommend. Okay, so on to some of the books for younger readers. I read Gods Don't Cry by Ellen Ryan, which is illustrated by Connor Merriman. This is an absolutely gorgeous book that is intended for children, but I got so much out of it as an adult reader, where the author and the illustrator are depicting gods from Irish mythology. So I had read a book from this author before that was specifically about the goddesses in Irish myth and legend, and this one is some of the male characters, boys and men, who are also part of Irish myth. And what I really loved about this, in addition to learning about my own culture, was how the author brought out so much stuff that is still relevant to kind of being a boy and a man today. The different forms of strength, and also showing strength in kind of vulnerability or gentleness, the different kind of powers and roles that these different figures play throughout these stories of myth. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. The illustrations that accompany the text are wonderful, and I would recommend this to anyone who is specifically obviously interested in Irish culture and Irish myth, which I know so many of you are, but also if you're just interested in mythology more broadly, this is a huge recommendation for me. I also read Tin by Padraig Kenny. This is a middle grade story that follows Christopher, who is an orphan, working with a man who is an engineer for mechanical children. Christopher is the only quote-unquote real boy amongst these mechanical children, and one day when there is an accident, it reveals what looks to be a really terrible truth. So we follow Christopher and some of his friends going on this journey to find out what has really been going on, what secrets have been kept for them, what are the adults' motivations. I don't think this is one that I am going to return to, but I thought it was a really unique middle grade story. I've never read anything that has this kind of mechanical element to it. I thought it was really unique and written really well, but not one that I think I will return to. I also read When Life Gives You Mangoes by Corinne Gettin. In this middle grade, we are following a girl named Clara who lives on this incredibly beautiful island, and in her village, nothing very much happens. But one of the major problems in Clara's life is that she has forgotten things. So she knows that something major happened to her the previous summer, but she has no memory of it until another girl arrives on the island and things start to click into place. Clara then begins to discover more and more and piece together what happened that previous summer. And the revelation for what went on was really satisfying. I didn't initially see it coming. It's a really beautiful book in terms of how it depicts the islands that Clara lives on. And she's also a character that you feel a real kind of connection with and you really want to support throughout the book. This was one that was also a really quick read, and I'm so glad that I read it. I also read Giant by Judith McQuaid. This is a fictional retelling of the childhood of C.S. Lewis, who is most well known for being the creator of the Chronicles of Narnia. In this book, we follow the friendship between Davy, who is a working class boy in Belfast, and Jax, who is C.S. Lewis. We follow these boys bonding and forming such a beautiful connection around their love for storytelling and art. But it's also fascinating to see how the class dynamics play out in their friendships, with Davy being someone who is working class and effectively working for Jack's family, who are far more like middle upper class. I don't necessarily know how much truth this is grounded in terms of what we know about their friendship when they were children, but I found it such a fascinating vehicle to explore those things around class dynamics in a way that is targeted for a child-friendly audience. I think I would have found this book just as interesting if it was not about C.S. Lewis, which I think is such an accomplishment. I loved how the city of Belfast was almost in it of itself a character in this book. I think it's such a short book that I hope doesn't go under the radar, because it is really fantastic, and I think if you are interested in any of those kind of class dynamics, you will find this thoroughly fascinating. And it's just also a beautiful story of a friendship. I also read A Fix of Life by Kel Menton. This is a young adult book and it is also set in Ireland, and we are following the friendship and then romantic relationship between two teenage boys. And it is a really beautiful story of that connection between the two of them, They also have really nuanced and complex things going on in their lives more broadly to the relationship. So their kind of home situations, their family lives. One of the boys is trans, so it also takes a look at what it is like to be trans and growing up at the minute and the various kind of difficulties that he faces because of that. There is also a fantasy element to this novel that really ramps up in the second half. And I did find as that ramped up, I became less interested in the story. I do feel like I would have been completely wrapped and compelled if it did stay solely this kind of contemporary real world story. When those fantasy elements came to the forefront, it was less interesting to me, but that is really just a personal preference. I know that would in fact improve people's enjoyment of the novel, increase people's enjoyment of the novel if that's something that you're more into than I am. I feel like Ireland produces such fantastic young adult writing, and it's just so phenomenal to see an increased level of diversity in that space compared to, you know, what was around when I was a teenager. And I think, speaking personally, seeing more queer stories was something that really would have changed what growing up was like for me. And this is such a beautiful addition to that emerging canon of Irish young adult books. I would say the writing style is on the more kind of literary edge, which again will appeal to lots of readers, and it's such a beautiful one. So that is it. They are all of the books that I read in September. There were quite a lot. Thank you for sticking with me if you've made it through all of these reviews. I anticipate this has probably been quite a long one. If you want to let me know you're here but you don't have anything particular to say, can you find out if there's like a mango emoji? If there's not, any fruit emoji will do. That is it for me today. I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you in my next video.